So it has been about 2 months since I did the second round of the presence process to completion, and I have thoughts. The first time I did the presence process was about a year or two ago, and I didn't know what to expect. I read the book. I was really excited to try the meditation. There wasn't anything particularly heavy going on in my life at that time. I just was on a spiritual journey and wanted to see what it was about. I'm a big believer in feeling your feelings and getting to deep roots of how you feel about things, and then like life just kind of changes around you gradually. That's been my reality. So I didn't have many expectations with the presence process. The people around me that I knew that had done it usually talk about the first time not being too deep or intense, and that was certainly the case with me. I would say from week to week there were cool insights or maybe like some cool aha moments, but nothing that really like rocked me to my core. And it was it's basically a gentle process around inner child work, which I was vaguely familiar with. And it was just great to see a different perspective on taking care of your inner child, essentially. So I put it away. I continued the breath for a little while longer. Side note, there is some, I'm not sure about the information online around how you're supposed to breathe. When I went to certain websites that did the breath like through audio, it sounded like breath work, like transformational breath work, like heavier breathing than I was doing. My experience with breath work is if I am breathing too intensely, I go into fight or flight pretty quickly, and it doesn't really help me. I don't get the insights that I get are not helpful to my growth. So I just do regular breath, like just how I normally breathe. I just don't take a pause. I don't know if it says in the book that's how you're supposed to do it, but then I go online and people talk about different things. I just do totally normal breath. There's like no effort whatsoever. The second time I did it, I remember very vividly. I was at home at my mom's house in Missouri, and I was sitting down to write, and I just had absolutely no motivation. I didn't understand why. Looking back now, I was suppressing a bunch of feelings and just putting my head down to work, which is a theme of mine. I decided I was just going to put it down for a while, but there was still this nagging feeling in me of, why aren't you writing? Just like not a lot of compassion for myself and for not wanting to write at the time. And then very unexpectedly, my mother's dog passed away, and I think the gift in grief is, because I was very attached to the dog as well, that it just blows away all, like you don't have the energy to bullshit yourself anymore. And that around that time, it's hard to remember the specifics, but around that time is when I saw my mother's book for the presence process, and I thought this might be a great time to do that again. So when I went into the process, depression came up immediately. And it felt like a kind of heavy, no motivation depression that I had been carrying around for a really long time and didn't know how to deal with it. So I just ignored it to the best of my ability and pushed through. So once I kind of zeroed in on that feeling, it was really hard to do anything else the first few weeks. In fact, it was easier to handle the depression. And then there was grief on top of that, but I could definitely tell that these were separate feelings, the grief for the dog and the depression. I looked forward to the meditations because that was the only time that I felt like I could handle the amount of depression that was coming up, because it wasn't something I could just turn off and go about my day. It was constant. Thankfully, I was at my home, my mother's home, and I could relax and there wasn't a lot expected of me. Thank God. What a privilege, because I could just lay around all day and relax and just work through whatever was coming up. And what I noticed was, as I sat with the feelings, the depression, the first wave of depression lasted maybe almost 2 weeks, and it was pretty excruciating. If you have long-term depression, I can't imagine how difficult that must be, because it felt like anytime I focused on my body or the physical sensations of the depression, it felt like sandpaper almost. Like it hurt my body. The silver lining in this is, because I was just sitting with it, eventually the first time around was scary because I didn't know how long this was going to last. Was I going to, weeks, months? People have depression for years. But around a week and a half, 2 weeks, it just popped, is the best way I can describe it. And I'd noticed a few days before the pop, there was a thought bubbling up. And I can't remember the specific thought, but it was along the lines of, you have no connections, like no one is around, like nobody cares about you, or something to that effect. And then once it kind of started, I remember a few days again before it popped, that thought it was almost like my brain was attached to the thought and the thought was attached to, I just lost a light. What happened? Ooh, she's hot. Okay. We lost a light. We're going to carry on. The thought was attached to the feeling, and then the thought just started to bubble up of nobody cares about you, for example. And I couldn't just reprogram it and say, oh no, that's not true, like people do care about me. It took a few days of feeling that, letting it come up, when it finally, almost as if it realized for itself, like, oh, that isn't true. And then I was totally fine. And I just kept doing the practice. I just kept doing the breath work. About a day or two later, the feeling would come back. And it was this process, essentially the whole 10 weeks, over and over again, feeling depressed, not understanding why, not being able to do anything, and then eventually some thought or belief would bubble up to the surface, and then it would just disappear. But I think if I hadn't already done a lot of work around inner child and sitting with feelings and just allowing things to come up instead of trying to muscle them, I don't know how well I would have handled that depression. Now, I did say at the beginning that I have a history of ignoring a feeling, totally subconscious. If I knew I was doing it, I wouldn't do it, but I wasn't aware that I was doing that. And I could see it very clearly at the start of the presence process that, oh, I'm having strong feelings about this. I don't want to be writing, whether it's like this piece of work or just in general right now, and I'm just not listening to that. And honestly, I understand why I kept running away from those feelings, because they are dark and difficult and confusing, and depression feels so isolating. I have had small bouts of depression in the past, but it wasn't to this extent. It didn't last. Now, there were like pops, but every time it would start again, I had no idea what was going on. And again, it could last a few days, it could last 2 weeks. I didn't know. And it kept coming. I would say I would resolve one, and then sometimes later that day or a day or two later, something new would come up. And that's difficult to not know when that's going to end. And the idea that after 10 weeks, it's magically just going to resolve itself sounds great. And that was not my reality at all. In fact, it's been 2 months plus the 10 weeks, give or take, since the presence process and since I allowed that depression to come up. And it's still, even just a week ago, I was still struggling with energy, motivation, depression, very dark negative thoughts. So I understand why I was running away from that, because that is scary and difficult and hard to deal with and very confusing. And if I didn't already have tools in place, I guess where I'm getting at is I don't know if I would recommend this book to somebody who, one, had a lot of trauma growing up that they don't know how to deal with, or somebody who is totally new to personal development or the spiritual world and has no idea. It's not like, I mean, of course the book walks you through it, but I think a conceptual idea of nurturing and taking care of your inner child or your emotional state, the concept of that and the reality of that look completely different, because we could think we know how to nurture our inner child, but when it actually starts rearing up, we're not going to nurture it initially how we see the ideal situation to nurture it would be. We're going to nurture it based on how our parents nurtured it, and we're going to do that unconsciously, and we're not even going to be aware that we're doing it. So what I love about this book is it gives you pause to reflect and allow feelings to come up, and at the same time, this to me would be a book for somebody who does have at least a little either awareness into their inner child already, or has tools around them, outside of them, or within themselves to take care of that. And lastly, I remember when I started and I was having these really strong feelings, I didn't want to go to therapy because I just wanted the pure experience. What can I do on my own? And let's just see how this goes. And two, he does talk about like outer drama, not getting involved in that, not like making, an ache comes up and you go to the doctor and go to the physical therapist and everything's focused on this pain instead of you focusing on your inner state. And for some reason, I don't think this is what he was saying. For some reason, I also equated therapy as like outer drama. Like I can do this myself. I can figure this out myself. That's also totally some of my own shit. But I would not recommend that moving forward. If I was going to do this again, absolutely get extra help if you need. I ended up doing therapy a few weeks after the 10 weeks was up, and it was so helpful to just talk about what was going on with me and what I was feeling and cry. Yeah, I have honestly just started really feeling better. The presence process is gnarly. It doesn't necessarily last 10 weeks. While it was incredibly difficult and I might still have depression episodes come up, the last one was, again, not that long ago. Every time it comes up and I work through it, I feel so much clearer and better on the other end. Now, there are other tools that I am using in conjunction with the presence process that for me actually work a little bit better for me. But I am grateful for the presence process because it shined a light on a place that I was not looking at, because I have a history of don't feel your feelings, just put your head down and work. If you have perfectionist tendencies like me, don't. Don't be afraid to go to therapy. Don't be afraid to use tools that you already know work for you. This is a great process, but it is for most people not everything. It's just another tool to use. But if you do feel like if you have a history of suppressing emotions or that runs in your family, being quiet and sitting with them and just allowing them to come up and bubble up and release is an incredibly healing tool, and it is worth it, but you do have to kind of go through some shit. Good luck.